Oh, hi there. I'm Talon, a semi-accomplished automotive photographer, writer, videographer, pretty much anything to do with cars. I just love them so much. And today, I think I'll share a few tips when it comes to automotive photography in particular. And essentially, that's going to amount to me roasting a bunch of old photos to show you what not to do. So join me. The first mistake I would say that amateur automotive photographers make is not dialing in their lighting. And for any photography, lighting is pretty much the most important thing at all times. But when it comes to cars, you have unique problems to worry about because cars have paint. Cars have very many different kinds of paint. And some paint is matte finish, some paint is very reflective. Dark paints will react to light very differently than bright paints will. So when I first started out, whenever I had to photograph a white car, it was just a nightmare, or a bright yellow car, absolute nightmare. And sometimes you'll even have multiple in the same photo that you need to take. If you have a white car and a black car next to each other, that's double the nightmare because you can only expose for one of them. Now, our first example of white cars being nightmares, we got this McLaren here. Now, this was basically the first professional photo shoot I ever did. I wrote an article on this company. They didn't pay me specifically, but I would kind of consider it professional. But as you can see, like the bright areas along the roof here, like completely blown out. And I have edited this, so I tried to recover those highlights a little bit, but still, when you bring that down, you can't get all the detail back. I also had to bump up a bunch of these shadows because the sun was just cutting off the light all across this side and you couldn't even read the text or anything. So as a result, after editing, the image just looks super flat and it doesn't look realistic whatsoever. With this particular shot, the first thing that I would tell past me to do is to flip the car around because I was shooting against the sun. And that's just really stupid because you've got a big ugly shadow in the frame, and you've got the top half of the car being overexposed, and you've got the bottom half of the car being underexposed. But if you flipped it around and you're shooting with the sun instead of against it, suddenly you would be able to expose for the side of the car that you're actually shooting on. The thing I would recommend after just flipping it around is to pick an environment that is suitable for your car's color, because bright white car, you're going to want to throw it in some shade instead of direct sunlight, or you can wait until you have very mild golden hour lighting. That can help a lot. If you have very dark paint, you can more get away with putting it in direct sunlight, but with a white car, like, plan these things, unlike what I did, 5 years ago. Which that kind of brings us into mistake number 2, I would say amateurs are going to make, which is not picking a suitable environment for their particular car. And this also has a lot to do with colors and things like that. Because if you have a bright red car, you put it in some lush greenery, it's going to make that red pop even more. You have a dark car, throw like a white house behind it or something brightly colored to make that pop as well. If you have a silver car, I would probably, put it in some nice golden hour lighting so you got some nice reflections bouncing off of it. And if you want like a big building in your background to make up your background, then you have to put your car further away from the building than your camera, because if you put it super close to the building and then you get your camera ready, then suddenly like 10% of the house is going to be in your frame. Or if you zoom out to get the rest of the house, your car is going to be this big. So, bring the car closer, bring your backdrop further away, and then both will have equal importance in your frame. Next important thing I would say is to dial in your aperture. And if you don't know, that's basically the hole in the lens that actually lets in light The lower aperture you go, the bigger that thing is going to get. The higher aperture, the smaller it's going to get. So a higher number is going to let in less light. But the catch is that at a higher aperture, your background is going to be blurred much more. Now, in my very early photography, I didn't really understand this concept, so I shot at really closed down apertures, and pretty much everything I took looked exactly the same. It looked like a phone shot or a GoPro shot or an old point and shoot shot, because I wasn't being mindful of my aperture. And and all of my backgrounds were super flat as a result. Once you figure out that you can put that aperture down, it's going to open up a whole new world of fantastical images, because a lot of the times, like, there's nothing particularly interesting in your background, and you can make it more interesting by, just like blurring it and kind of turning it into a painterly aesthetic. But once I learned what I could do with low apertures, I made another mistake, which is to shoot low aperture all the time. Now, super low apertures like 2.8 or even lower are great for like portraits, like close-ups of people's faces, because you can get right on their face. Their face is going to be sharp, background is going to be, all mush. But when you're shooting a car, that's a much more three-dimensional object, which means at lower apertures, the front of the car might be sharp, yet the rear of the car is all blurry. And what I used to do, up until recently even, is to crank my aperture down to basically 2.8 for all of my shots, which is a big mistake, because when you're at 2.8 or even lower, you're going to have much less sharpness throughout your entire image frame. And the reason for that basically is because the larger you make that aperture, the harder of a time your lens is going to have focusing in either auto or manual. And if it's in manual focus, which I usually use, that's completely my fault. The lenses I use aren't super expensive, which also means that they're not going to be as sharp at those low settings. So, I've snapped plenty of photos where I snap it f2.8 and I look at my tiny little LCD screen on my Nikon and go, oh, that looks great. And then as soon as I get it full size on my computer, I realize that none of this is sharp. And this Porsche GT3 photo over here, I still kept it because I really like the composition on it, but once you zoom in on it, you can see that it's not as sharp as it needs to be, and it just drives me insane. Overall, I still like the photo. Client didn't even really notice because they're not really looking at it blown up to 100% size, but still, it drives me crazy. And if you bump up your aperture, to more like 3.5 or 4, you're not going to have these sharpness issues, but you're still going to be able to blur your background as long as it's a good distance away. So that is where I would say the safe spot is. And then, of course, if you want to have many subjects, like a row of cars all in one, then you do want to close down that aperture so that you can get all of them in focus at once. The next thing a beginner photographer might not think about is choosing the correct lenses. And if you're a super beginner, you'll probably just have whatever, like 18 to 55 that came with your camera. And these are a decent thing to get you started out, but the problem with cheap lenses like this is that when you zoom in, it actually closes your aperture down and you're going to get less light and your photos are going to look worse. But if you want to get serious about automotive or motorsport photography, I would tell you to get at least 2 lenses, which is one lens that can be a wide to mid-range angle, which is the one I got on my video camera right now. That is a 28 to 72 millimeter, I believe, Tamron. Great lens. I can do pretty much 90% of my shots on that one. And then the other thing is if you're doing track photography, you're pretty much gonna need a long lens any way you slice it. And my long lens is this Tamron 70 to 200 millimeter. Also great lens. You can get way zoomed in with this thing. And if you're just shooting, you know, still cars at car shows, or if you have a client that lets you place the car, you know, wherever you please, basically, you can get a lot more done with a basic mid-range lens. But if you're at a track, like, your line of sight pretty much is what it is, so you want to be able to zoom in as far as you can. And you know, 200 millimeter, like, these go for a lot of money, but if you want more than 200, that is a lot of money. So 200 is kind of what I stick with. But if you're not ready to invest in a big lens, physically get as close to the action. That is what I would recommend you do. I have a couple examples from a Road Atlanta event I attended around 2018, and first one is this GT40 here. Not a great shot because I was using my mid-range lens. I didn't have my long lens at the time, and I was trying to get a car that was pretty far away, and I was standing on a little bridge next to the track. So yeah, I really couldn't get as close as I wanted to the car. And this photo, I also cropped in a bit to make it look like I had a zoom lens, but that also, you know, damages the quality of the image. We got one from the same event with this Datsun, in which I got much closer to the track, and I was able to because I had a press pass, but you're obviously not always going to have that. But yeah, you know, either get as close to the action as you can or get a big lens. Also, if you're doing still photography, you have to be aware of how your lens is going to affect your image. Basically, if you're shooting at a super wide angle, which I also made that mistake many a times, it's not going to make your image look realistic. It's going to make it look all out of proportion, which can enhance the look of your photos sometimes, but you don't want every photo to look like that. So basically, you're going to want to use about a 50 millimeter focal length to get the most accurate results. The mistake that I used to make all the time is not getting in good positions or not getting in a variety of positions, because when I look at my early photos, they're all basically me standing, just standing in a normal position, you know, 5'10", and just going looking down on the car. Now this will give you basically a very bland image 100% of the time. If you want to just take a very basic image of the car, that's fine, but if you want an exciting image, you have to get exciting angles. So basically what I would recommend is, well, first of all, when you're doing photography, don't wear clothes that you're not afraid to get dirty, because sometimes you want to get right on the ground to get a really low shot as you possibly can, because that's going to make the car look larger than life. It's going to make it look imposing in that frame. If you're shooting a big group, you're going to want to get high and, you know, climb a ladder if you can, because all of those like magazine shots of the groups of cars they have in a comparison test, like 100% of those are taken with a ladder. Another simple thing I like to do is instead of just taking the car at a flat angle, is to just tilt my head, you know, 15 degrees in either direction, which is gonna, you know, make it a little bit more stylish. It's not gonna be super realistic, but I think it adds a little bit more dynamic feel to your frames. And when it comes to getting multiple angles, I'm not just talking about full body shots. Like, if you have access to the car, like, open the car up, see what's in the interior, just snap like everything, snap the gear shift, you know, headlights, whatever else, because some of my favorite shots that I've ever taken have been like badge shots, not bad shots. And if you have something like a Tamron 75 millimeter lens, you know, zoom that thing all the way in. It has pretty good macro focusing, which means you can get right up on your subject and get these tiny little details like badges and stuff. And not only are you going to get a nice, sharp, image of your detail shot, but you're also going to get some nice trippy blur effects for your background. Little half piece of advice I would give for beginners. Basically, you know, when I started out, and pretty much when anybody is going to start out, they're just going to go to whatever Cars and Coffee or Track Day and just snap whatever happens to be there. But that gives you disadvantages because you're going to have crowds all around you. You got to work your way through, and you're not going to be able to pick where your cars are, where your subject is going to be. You're not going to be able to pick what lighting conditions you have. But when you go to these events, you know, think about the conditions of the venue and the conditions of whichever subject you're trying to get at, and how you can work in those conditions without having control over placement and composition and things like that. So, you know, later on down the road, if you have a friend's car or you have a client's car that you can then choose those conditions, you're going to be much more aware of those things when you actually have control over them. So I think that's helpful. If you thought that was helpful, let me know. If you didn't think that was helpful, let me know anyway, because I need engagement and whatever else. But yeah, you know, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Check out my website. I do writing and stuff. It's whatever. That's pretty much all I gotta say. Bye.